How do you choose the right engine for your boat? Nautical tips in a nutshell, follow us. But let's start with a factor that comes before everything else. There are eons. You've chosen the boat, and most people I know first choose the boat and then the engine if they have to make a choice. If the manufacturer of that model only offers that type of engine, say Inboard, IPS, Outboard, Inboard, 2-stroke, 4-stroke, jet drive, I don't know, well, that's what it is. So for that boat, if the manufacturer only offers that type of solution, that's your choice boat, mainly because you don't have any other option. However, if we assume that the manufacturer allows you to choose between different types of engines for that boat, then it's right and proper for you to consider the main issues that distinguish or make a difference between the various engines. Let's list the main ones, of course. Type of mechanics. So we have the outboard engine, the inboard engine, which has just the propeller shaft coming out under the boat toward the back end, the sterndrive, which is the one attached at the rear. In addition, there's a fourth type, which is the jet drive. It's kind of like a sterndrive or a jet drive. Let's say it's a bit of a hybrid between the two. And these are basically the four main types on the market. So the inboard engine, if you always have the option to choose, has the advantage of having very few components submerged in the sea. So it's less affected by things like salt, corrosion, or other external factors, including biological elements from the sea itself or galvanic currents. Why is that? Because underneath the boat, we have this shaft, which is a solid steel tube with the propeller at the end. Everything else is inside the boat. So we have less maintenance because basically once this is taken care of, inside the boat we have an engine, and normally inboards are diesel way, have a diesel engine and the usual maintenance, but we no longer have external corrosion. The outboard motor, on the other hand, is a single unit, let's put it that way, completely outside the boat. In fact, it is bolted to the transom at the back of the boat with the lower unit submerged in water, but the entire engine is together, all in one block. It's not literally a single piece, but is all in one unit and is completely separate from the rest of the boat and its system. So everything is there, outside the boat. Maintenance is fairly simple for technicians, not necessarily for you, but for technicians, because they don't have to climb aboard and open up the boat. If it's convenient enough, they can even perform maintenance out of the water, simply by walking up to the engine at the front. You have it right in front of you, you remove the cowling, so the cover, and the engine is right there where you'll be doing the maintenance. The Sterndrive, which in terms of complexity is perhaps the most complex engine in the sense that we have, well, even the word itself is longer, we have the engine inside, and the boat, let's say, the engine is here, the boat ends here, and here you have the drive shaft with its propeller section, so the drive shaft and the final propeller. So we have a part that's submerged in water, a part that's not submerged outside the water but inside the bottom. We have this hybrid, let's say it's neither in nor out. In fact, that's why it's called the Sterndrive. Ease of maintenance, it's a maybe. On one hand, we have more space because these are engines with larger displacements. They can be either diesel or gasoline usually. So we have bigger engines, more room for technicians to move around and work. But on the other hand, there are more mechanisms because we also have an external mechanism, which is the drive leg, and that has to be managed from the outside. So if I need to do some work, let's say on an inboard-outboard engine, I won't have everything right in front of me. I have to uncover the boat, obviously get on board to access the engine compartment, do the internal maintenance, and then once that's done, I also have to take care of the drive leg from the outside. So I don't have everything in a single space and it becomes a bit more complicated. That's basically all there is to it. The jet drive engine, which is well known, for example, in jet skis, is similar to an inboard-outboard engine, except that instead of having a drive leg with an external propeller, it has an external jet drive. But the engine is still inside, so we're still talking about an inboard-outboard setup where the only difference is the mechanics of the propulsion system, whether it's a turbine jet or a bladed propeller. How does the inboard, outboard, and outboard system work? Fuel consumption? Well, it depends on how sensitive you are to the word consumption. So we always start out a bit prejudiced, but that's because we come from a world where, except for those who work with them, boats are mainly for fun, so it's hard to make a direct comparison. For example, with your car, which you use every day, maybe for a lot of kilometers to get to work, you know exactly how much time, how many hours, how many kilometers you travel on the road, either exactly or at least approximately, but you still know. With a boat, it's a different story. You take the boat out to have fun. So if you want to have more fun, maybe you'll spend a bit more. If you want to have less fun or you have less time, you'll spend less. So buying a boat only or mainly based on how much it consumes, the boat and its engine, of course solely or primarily for what the engine does in terms of fuel consumption, in my opinion, is wrong because the approach itself is fundamentally flawed. However, it could still be a deciding factor for many people. That said, on average, and I say on average because I don't want to get attacked, although if it happens, I'll respond, it's not a problem with engine manufacturers. So generally speaking, the ones that tend to consume less are outboard engines because they have smaller displacements. The fact that the engine is here and the propeller is down there, plus they're designed with new technologies, means smaller displacements and a lot more horsepower. So for the same horsepower compared to inboard engines, we have a smaller displacement and as a result, lower fuel consumption. Lower by how much? Well, 10, 20, 30, even 40% less. It really depends on the type of boat, the type of setup as well, the power ratio, because there are some cases where the inboard engine actually consumes less than the outboard. But why is that? Because the power ratios I used weren't correct. So, for example, if I put a 40 horsepower engine on a 10-meter boat, maybe a 100 horsepower inboard engine will use less fuel. But why is that? Is it because it's better? I don't know. You have to look at each case individually, but generally speaking, the outboard engine, being a more compact machine with a smaller displacement, consumes less. Again, generally speaking, the inboard engine is the second most efficient, or in some cases even the first, consuming less in terms of miles compared to the outboard, but that's mainly because if we're talking about inboards, especially those installed on sailboats, they're low horsepower engines running at very low RPMs. They're often older diesel engines, but since they operate at low speeds and very low revolutions, they basically consume very little, mainly because they're not being pushed hard. Diesel inboard engines, perhaps installed on boats not many of 10, 12 or 15 meters with a shaft drive, consume fuel in a way that's similar to outboards, somewhere in between outboards and inboards. Even there, in some cases, they're better than outboards. In some cases, better than everything else. It really depends on the power to weight ratio specific to the boat. For example, even boats that are built and designed to work perfectly or as well as possible with an inboard engine, if you then put outboards on that same boat, you create a hydrodynamic disaster. I mean, you end up consuming a ridiculous amount of fuel and maybe you gain 5 knots, but in the end, your consumption doubles or even more. But it really depends. It's a case-by-case situation. Generally speaking, that's how it is. The inboard engine consumes fuel in a way that's similar to or even less than the inboard-outboard. And it's comparable to the outboard. It's closer to the outboard than to the inboard-outboard. Inboard-outboard, power, choosing the right power. So here too, as I mentioned at the beginning, sometimes there's not much you can do in the sense that the boatyard that built the boat will tell you this engine or this power is the maximum you can use. You can't go beyond that. Or maybe they'll say this is the maximum power, but the recommended is slightly lower, much lower, or just lower. I mean, it's not like you have to just listen blindly. So you can't install an engine for which the boat or the inflatable isn't certified to handle that kind of power. That said, if a boatyard certifies and therefore produces a product that can handle a certain level of power, it doesn't do it any harm. So I'm not saying that every time you have to install the maximum applicable power, but certainly if you do, it doesn't do any harm. At worst, you just don't use all that power. So in that case, the choice might be, is it really worth spending 10,000 euros more, 50,000 euros more? I don't know what kind of boat we're talking about for this type of engine or engines, or even 100,000 euros more. I don't know when with these ones I can do exactly what I need to do. I use the right amount of fuel, I'm satisfied, and so on. It's up to you to decide. It's a matter of budget, it's a matter of safety at sea. As for safety at sea, if the shipyard itself tells you, I recommend this power, even if the maximum power allowed is higher, it means they've done their calculations well and they don't want to have customers out at sea who run into problems. That said, choose what suits you best, depending on how you want to use the boat. I don't know, if you want a very fast, very responsive boat, you'll generally go for the most powerful engine possible. If you couldn't care less about that, you'll use less powerful engines and maybe even save some money. So it's up to you to decide this, but always rely on the certification of the boat or inflatable you're buying. 2-stroke, 4-stroke diesel. Well, I basically rule out 2-stroke engines because since 2007, at least for outboards, but I think it applies to other types of engines too. It's been forbidden to produce them in the community, basically in Europe. So let's forget about 2-stroke engines, meaning it's not even possible to consider them anymore. But they worked well, they were lighter. Okay, but you can't buy them anymore, so there's no problem. Use the engines, as long as there aren't any restrictions, though they're gradually being introduced there, still aren't any actual widespread restrictions on the use of engines. 2-stroke engines in particular, so you can still use them without major issues. So the choice is between a diesel engine, a hybrid engine, an electric engine, or a gasoline engine. 4-stroke. Today, when it comes to outboard motors, about 90 to 95% of the engines produced are 4-stroke. The very latest generation consumes significantly less fuel compared to the old 2-stroke engines. These are technologically very advanced engines that work well. On average, they leave customers very satisfied, so they perform well. A hybrid engineer are some technologies, some manufacturers who are starting to make them. At the moment, it's not very common to use them, these fascinating hybrids between electric and fuel boot. Surely in the coming years, we'll see something far more interesting. As for electric engines, today we have two major issues to manage. Range, the practical range of recharging the substantial weight of the batteries basically, and the crucial ability to recharge them efficiently. So the access points for recharging and the range. As for power, today it keeps increasing because we've even reached very significant boats. But the problem isn't really the engine itself, it's that to have 200, 300, 500 horsepower, you need a boat full of batteries. Literally, meaning you have to fill an 8 or 10 meter boat with batteries. I don't know. Technology is advancing and maybe soon something will be found, technology, science will find a way to make these engines run. At the moment, certainly, as far as outboard motors are concerned, the most widely used technology is the 4-stroke. And for inboard engines, whether IPS or shaft drive, it's diesel, turbo diesel technology, which has also made huge strides in terms of fuel consumption and reliability. Brands, even there, is it difficult or is it difficult? I prefer not to do it. As for brands today, let's talk about 2025. If we're talking about buying new engines, the choice is relatively significant. There are 5 main outboard engine brands worldwide. And it's a close competition, meaning that technologically and in terms of reliability, I wouldn't say they're all exactly the same, but each has its own features. Then you choose based on the model. If you're focused on a 500 horsepower engine rather than a 300 or a 30, you'll compare the equivalent models from other brands to get an idea of fuel consumption, check reviews, and so on. Of course, it's a close competition. Why? Because today's engine manufacturers are very, very advanced. Even our only European engine manufacturer, Selva, makes excellent machines, both on their own and in collaboration with Yamaha. So there are engines that are truly technologically top-notch. they're reliable, period. They're completely reliable. That said, if you want, make your choice based on the type of service available in your area. It will be easier if, for example, you have an engine of this brand and that brand has an authorized technician in your port, in nearby ports, or in the area, whether it's for warranties, for servicing, or for a specific knowledge of the particular issues and characteristics of that specific engine. So the choice often comes down to what kind of support I have at that location. If you have support for that brand at that location, well, choose it. If you relied more on another brand because you have a motorcycle or a car from that brand, then go with that one. It's really a matter of feeling a connection in your heart to the manufacturer's brand. The Japanese, the American, the European, it's up to you. You decide what to do. Today, in 2025, when it comes to buying new engines, generally speaking, they're really well made. When it comes to Sterndrives, there's not much to say, because usually it's the shipyard itself that tells you which one to buy. There are two options for Sterndrives. As for inboard engines, there are two or three options. It's not like there's a lot of choice to be made. There too, since these are competitors with little competition, they're technologically advanced, they're doing well, so you land on your feet regardless. Nowadays, with 2025 technologies, it's hard to end up with a bad engine or a brand that doesn't exist. It's really difficult. At the moment in Europe, whether the products are American, European, or Asian, when it comes to Japan, or brands controlled by Japanese holdings honestly, you can rest easy. If you don't want to miss any of our videos, our nautical tips in a nutshell, all you have to do is subscribe right here to this channel. From Lake Garda, all that's left for me to say is fair winds and always keep an eye on the weather.